The cabin lights hummed as a sharp ripple of tension ran through row 12. Marla stood in the aisle, her posture rigid, her gaze fixed on me and Emma. Every passenger nearby turned, sensing the storm brewing before it even spoke. "I need this row," she said, finally, her voice low but insistent, like a challenge thrown across the narrow aisle. I shook my head slightly. "We paid for these seats," I said, keeping my tone calm. She didn't flinch. Her finger jabbed toward the empty row behind us. "They promised me. Move them." Emma squeezed my hand, silent but tense, as Marla's presence seemed to press against the walls of the cabin itself. The air felt thicker, almost vibrating with the anticipation of a confrontation. The flight attendant stepped in a professional wall of calm between us. "Ma'am, is there a problem?" Marla waved her crumpled boarding pass. "Yes, this row is supposed to be mine. They need to move." I took a slow breath. She's not going to back down. Every instinct told me she thrived on forcing submission, on making others bend to her will. And now, with the attendant's polite gaze upon us, I understood this was just the beginning. This isn't over yet, I thought, bracing for the escalation that was already unfolding. Her name was Marla Trent, and the moment she appeared in the aisle, every passenger felt the shift in the air. Her sharp cheekbones and pursed lips gave her face an almost sculpted severity, while a faint crease between her brows hinted at perpetual irritation. Dark eyes, narrow and assessing, scanned the row like a predator sizing up its prey. Marla's posture was rigid, shoulders squared, hands planted firmly on the edges of her boarding pass as if it were a shield. She wore a pale pink blouse and light cardigan colors that might have softened her on someone else, but on her, they emphasized the tension radiating from every line of her body. "This row is mine," she said, her voice low and controlled, yet cutting through the murmur of the cabin. I cleared my throat. "We're in our assigned seats," I said cautiously. Her eyes flicked to me, and for a moment the calculated fury in her gaze made my pulse quicken. "I don't care. I need space." "You two must move," she insisted, stepping forward just enough to narrow the aisle. Every movement, every glance radiated authority and insistence. Marla wasn't just a passenger with a complaint. She was a force demanding compliance, a storm wrapped in pastel colors, and the entire cabin seemed to sense it. Marla Trent stood rigidly in the aisle, the crumpled boarding pass clutched tightly in her hand. Every movement she made seemed calculated, precise, designed to dominate the narrow space. Her dark eyes locked onto me, and Emma sharp and unyielding, as if daring us to challenge her. "Move," she said, voice calm, but edged with authority slicing through the soft hum of the cabin. I shifted slightly, keeping my tone measured. "We can't just get up without confirmation," I said. Emma leaned closer to me, whispering under her breath, She's not even listening." Marla's gaze didn't waver. "You don't get it. This row is supposed to be mine. I need space." "You two move now," she said, stepping just enough into the aisle to make the air feel tighter. Her words weren't a request, they were a command. A few passengers glanced over, curiosity and unease mingling on their faces. I could feel the weight of their attention pressing against me, as if the entire cabin was holding its breath. The flight attendant arrived, stepping between us. "Ma'am, please let's find a solution," she said calmly, her tone firm yet neutral. "This is a solution," Marla replied, eyes cold, lips pressed in a thin line. "I told them this would be arranged. You need to move." I inhaled, slowly grounding myself. "We're not refusing to cooperate," I said, keeping my voice even. "The crew needs to confirm first." Her jaw tightened, and she took a deliberate step closer. "Then, hurry up," she snapped. The aisle seemed to shrink under her presence, passengers shifting uncomfortably, murmuring. Every glance, every shuffle, amplified the tension. It was clear Marla Trent didn't just want a seat. She wanted compliance, submission, and she had already decided she would get it. The flight attendant's calm didn't faze Marla Trent. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing, scanning the row as if every inch of space belonged to her. "I told them this would be fixed," she said sharply, voice low but cutting. "You two need to move. I can't sit next to strangers." "I understand your concern," the attendant said, stepping closer. "But your assigned seat is several rows back. We need to follow the seating chart." Marla scoffed, tossing her head back. "The chart doesn't matter. They promised me this row." "This is unacceptable." Her voice rose, drawing a few curious glances from passengers nearby. Emma whispered, gripping my hand. "She's escalating. Now it's not just us." I nodded silently. "We can't let this spiral," I murmured. Marla leaned in closer, tilting her head, her eyes sharp as a blade. "You're being selfish," she accused, pointing toward me. "I have needs. You two can handle being separated for one flight, right?" A murmur rippled through the cabin. One passenger muttered, "Here we go." The flight attendant held up a hand. "Ma'am, please step back. Let's resolve this without blocking the aisle. I will not, Marla shouted. I am entitled to this space. No one understands my situation. Her entitlement hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The system, the crew, the rules, the authority of the airline was being weaponized against them, yet she acted as if she could bend it at will. Emma leaned toward me, whispering, "They're not going to let her get away with this, are they?" I shook my head. Not unless she stops herself. And that doesn't seem likely. The cabin felt smaller, tighter. Every glance, every shuffle from passengers underscored that Marla Trent was no longer just a difficult neighbor. She had escalated the conflict into the realm of authority and public confrontation. Marla Trent's demands were no longer just annoying, they were threatening the flow of the entire cabin. She jabbed a finger at me. "You think you can ignore me? This row is mine. Move." Passengers shifted in their seats, some murmuring under their breath, others giving her wary glances. I felt my chest tighten, a mixture of frustration and apprehension pressing down. Emma's hand squeezed mine, grounding me, but I could feel the strain radiating through her as well. "We can't just move without confirmation from the crew," I said quietly, trying to keep the calm that felt increasingly fragile. "Confirmation, they promised me," Marla snapped, her voice rising sharp and insistent. "Do you understand what it means to be denied? What's yours, I will not sit next to strangers." I can't. Her words carried more than entitlement. They carried fear, panic, and obsession. I noticed the trembling in her hands as she gripped her boarding pass, the slight hitch in her breath. She wasn't just asserting control. She was reacting to a world she felt was slipping from her grasp. A passenger from row 15 muttered, "Someone should record this." Emma leaned closer, whispering, "She's spiraling. This isn't normal." I exhaled slowly. "We can't give in. Not now. We can't let her dictate everything." Marla's gaze shifted briefly, flickering with something almost human desperation, but it vanished the instant I met her eyes. The calculated intensity returned sharper than before. Her refusal to back down was no longer a minor confrontation. It carried stakes that were social, emotional, and increasingly public. If the crew didn't act, this would escalate further. She was weaponizing authority, entitlement, and fear, creating a ripple effect that threatened to engulf everyone in the cabin. I clenched my jaw, realizing that no amount of reasoning, logic, or patience would reach her. Emma's grip on my hand reminded me this wasn't about winning or losing. This was about enduring, documenting, and letting the system respond. The cabin held its collective breath as Marla Trent's fury continued, and I understood with absolute clarity this was far bigger than just a row of seats. The supervisor arrived with purposeful strides, her presence instantly sharpening the tension in the cabin. Marla Trent's eyes flicked to her, narrowing, but the authority in the woman's posture didn't waver. "Ma'am, I understand there's an issue with seating," the supervisor said, calmly scanning the row. "Can you explain the problem?" "This row is mine," Marla snapped, thrusting the crumpled boarding pass forward. "They promised me. I cannot sit next to anyone else. You have to move them." The supervisor lifted an eyebrow and glanced at the flight attendant. "Your assigned seat is in row 18, she said, tone measured. "I see no indication of any special arrangement for a full row." Marla's jaw tightened. "They told me it would be arranged verbally." "Who told you?" the supervisor interrupted, calm but firm. Marla faltered, scanning the crew passengers, her voice faltering. I don't remember. Someone said it would be fixed." I felt a flicker of clarity inside me. "This is it. The system is here," Emma whispered, barely audible. "She can't argue with that." Marla's gaze darted from me to Emma, then to the supervisor, desperation flickering beneath the veneer of control. "You don't understand," she hissed. "I have needs. I cannot sit next to strangers, ma'am," the supervisor said, stepping closer. "We want to help you reach your destination, but we cannot depart until you take your assigned seat. Refusal may require you to exit the aircraft." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Marla's expression shifted, panic and indignation warping her features. The cabin seemed to lean in collectively, watching, waiting. I glanced at Emma. Her fingers squeezed mine again. We both knew that the tide had shifted. Authority was now directly involved. This wasn't about politeness anymore. This was about compliance, legality, and the undeniable presence of power against entitlement. Marla Trent's next move would decide the point of no return. Marla Trent planted herself stubbornly in the aisle, arms crossed like a shield. The supervisor's gaze held steady, unyielding, while passengers craned their necks, sensing the standoff had reached its peak. "You must take your assigned seat," the supervisor said firmly. "Refusal will require you to deplane." Marla's face twisted with disbelief. "You can't do that. I have every right to be here," she shouted, voice sharp and trembling. A passenger in the back raised a phone. "I've been recording," he said quietly, "just in case you need it." Marla spun toward him, eyes wide. "Delete that now. You can't record me." "I can," he replied calmly. And I did. The supervisor stepped closer, taking the phone. She played the footage, the cabin silent, except for Marla's sharp inhalations. On the screen, every demand, every refusal, every outburst played clearly. The evidence was undeniable. Marla's composure cracked, desperation flickering in her eyes. "This is harassment. You're ganging up on me," she shouted, her voice rising with panic. Emma whispered softly, "It's over. She's trapped." Marla pivoted, glaring at me. "This is your fault. If you'd just moved—" "No," I said, evenly meeting her gaze. "If you'd treated people with respect, none of this would be happening." Her lips trembled, fury and humiliation warring across her features. The supervisor gestured toward her bag. "Ma'am, please gather your belongings. We are waiting." The crowd of passengers watched as Marla hesitated, every muscle tense, realizing the system she tried to bend was holding firm. Slowly, her defiance wavered, the storm of entitlement and panic contained, if only momentarily. She grabbed her bag, muttering under her breath, but the aisle was clear, the crew unwavering. Every step she took toward the exit carried the weight of her loss of control, the undeniable confirmation that her tactics had failed. The cabin exhaled collectively. The point of no return had passed. Marla Trent was cornered, and there was no turning back. The cabin seemed to shrink under the weight of tension as the supervisor stepped fully into the aisle, placing herself directly in front of Marla Trent. Every eye followed the confrontation, passengers leaning forward in quiet anticipation, the hum of engines replaced by the charged silence. "Ma'am," the supervisor began, voice calm, "but absolute. You must comply with your assigned seat. We cannot depart otherwise." Marla's jaw tightened and her eyes flashed with indignation. "I will not. I deserve this row. You're all ganging up on me." Her voice carried through the cabin, drawing glances from passengers several rows back. Emma gripped my hand, whispering, "Stay calm. Don't let her bait you." I exhaled slowly. "Your actions are your own," I said, keeping my tone steady. "The rules apply to everyone, not just you." Marla pivoted sharply, pointing directly at me. "This is your fault. You're making everyone turn against me." The supervisor's gaze didn't waver. "We want to help you reach your destination, but the flight cannot proceed until you follow instructions." Marla's defiance flickered, replaced briefly by panic, but she rallied, glaring at the crew, then at the passengers. "You can't do this, A quiet murmur ran through the cabin. Some passengers shook their heads, others whispered agreement with the crew. The collective pressure of the cabin, the authority of the supervisor, and the undeniable truth of her escalating entitlement pressed in on Marla Trent. This wasn't just a personal confrontation anymore, it was a public reckoning, and she stood at the eye of the storm, cornered by the law, the rules, and every witness in the cabin. The supervisor held up the phone, the small screen casting a pale glow across Marla Trent's tense features. The recording played clearly, every sharp demand, every accusation, every refusal to follow the crew's instructions, captured in precise detail. The cabin leaned in, silent and rapt, as if watching a trial unfold before their eyes. Marla's lips pressed into a thin line, her face paling. "You can't do this. That's private," she hissed, darting her eyes from the supervisor to the passengers, desperate for some ally, some reprieve. The supervisor's tone remained steady, measured, but carried the weight of authority. "Ma'am, this footage confirms repeated refusal to comply with crew instructions. For the safety and comfort of everyone on board, you will need to gather your belongings and deplane immediately if you do not follow the assigned seat instructions." A ripple of murmurs passed through the cabin. Some passengers shook their heads, others muttered approval. "Finally, someone holding her accountable," one said quietly. Emma exhaled, her fingers loosening around mine. I could feel her tension easing slightly, though the weight of the confrontation still pressed down. Marla's expression flickered, panic, indignation, disbelief, but the clear, unwavering authority in the supervisor's voice left her no room for maneuver. Every passenger's gaze seemed to reinforce the truth she had tried to deny. Her behavior had consequences. The storm Marla had wielded with such confidence was now fully turned against her. She was cornered, exposed, and powerless. The point of no return had been reached, and there was no way back. Marla Trent's face drained of color as the supervisor's words sank in each syllable, punctuating the collapse of her self-assured control. The entire cabin seemed to lean in, passengers silent but fully aware of the unraveling storm in the aisle. I didn't do anything wrong," she blurted, voice trembling between fury and panic. "This isn't fair, ma'am," the supervisor said firmly, taking a step closer. "Please gather your belongings. We are waiting." Her hands shook as she clutched her bag, muttering under her breath, every movement amplified by the watchful eyes of the passengers. A few shifted uncomfortably, others shook their heads in quiet disapproval, but none looked away. The weight of collective judgment pressed down, and for the first time, Marla Trent felt cornered. Emma leaned slightly toward me, whispering, "It's over. She's trapped." I met Marla's glare evenly. "Your actions brought this on yourself," I said quietly. "No one else." The defiance that had radiated from her like a shield faltered, replaced by a raw sting of humiliation. Panic flickered in her eyes, then widened as she slowly realized the system she had tried to manipulate. The crew, the supervisor, the witnesses would not bend to her will. Step by step, she moved toward the exit, her body tense, her shoulders rigid, muttering complaints and muttering indignation. There was no applause, no cheer, only the quiet, unwavering judgment of every passenger who had seen her unravel. The cabin exhaled collectively, tension finally breaking. Marla Trent, once commanding and unyielding, was defeated, cornered by authority, evidence, and the weight of social scrutiny. The aisle, once her domain, now marked her surrender. Every step toward the exit confirmed the undeniable truth: her reign of entitlement had ended, and there was no turning back. The cabin exhaled as Marla Trent finally moved down the aisle, her steps measured, muttering, every eye following her retreat. The tension that had coiled tight around every passenger slowly began to loosen, replaced by quiet murmurs of relief and disbelief. Emma leaned back, letting out a slow breath. "I can't believe that's over," she whispered, her fingers finally unclenching from mine. I nodded, feeling the weight of adrenaline drain from my shoulders. The small victories were subtle, the soft head shakes, murmured apologies from nearby passengers, grateful glances from those who had been trapped in the standoff. No one applauded, but the collective acknowledgement of what had just happened was palpable. A passenger from the back leaned slightly forward. "You handled that better than anyone I've seen," he said quietly. Emma smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "At least it's done," she murmured. The cabin lights hummed engines, rumbling softly beneath our feet. The air felt lighter, the oppressive weight of entitlement dissipated. For the first time in what felt like hours, the flight seemed calm, passengers settling into the gentle rhythm of travel. The earlier storm, now a quiet memory, leaving only a restored sense of order. Moments later, the flight attendant returned with a calm, professional tone. "For clarity, ma'am has been asked to deplane due to repeated refusal to comply with crew instructions," she announced, glancing briefly at Marla Trent's empty row. "All other passengers may remain seated, and the flight will proceed according to the original seat assignments." A small murmur of approval rippled through the cabin. Emma exhaled, leaning back against the headrest. "So, that's official," she said softly. I nodded, still catching my breath. The supervisor added, "This ensures that all passengers' rights are respected and that safety protocols are maintained. No seat may be reassigned without proper confirmation, and the crew will continue to enforce compliance strictly." The reassurance was subtle but significant. It wasn't just about seats. It was a confirmation that the rules applied equally, that authority had been applied fairly, and that further escalation would be handled firmly. Emma tilted her head, a small smile touching her lips. "At least now we can really relax," she murmured. I let my shoulders drop, the tension easing. The procedural resolution had restored order without drama, leaving only a clear acknowledgement that entitlement could not bend the system. The cabin, once a cauldron of anticipation, now hummed with steady, regulated calm. The cabin settled into a quiet rhythm as the last echoes of Marla Trent's departure faded. Passengers adjusted in their seats, a collective sigh passing through the rows. The earlier storm of entitlement and chaos had been replaced by calm, the normal rhythm of travel restored. Emma leaned back, her fingers brushing my wrist, a small smile tugging at her lips. "She really thought she could control everyone," she murmured. I glanced at our row, the empty space where Marla had stood, now a silent reminder of the ordeal. The flight attendant passed by, offering a reassuring nod and a pair of drink vouchers for our patients. "For handling that calmly," she said with a warm smile. I took a slow breath, letting the tension leave my body. The system had worked. Rules were upheld, authority respected, and the cabin's order preserved. Marla's attempts at dominance had collapsed in plain sight, leaving a quiet justice in her absence. Looking out the window at the clouds rushing past, I felt a subtle sense of victory, not from confrontation, but from clarity, patience, and the unwavering enforcement of fairness. Emma's hand squeezed mine gently. I smiled softly. "Some lessons only board a plane once," I said, and for the first time since she appeared, the air felt light, the cabin calm, and the storm finally behind us.